Hello and welcome to episode number 17 of the Curling Legends podcast. My name's Kevin Palmer, and each week through the curling season, I share a conversation with a player or a storyteller from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. We cover curling from the beginning of the slide through to the adoption of the free guard zone. Ron Northcott is my guest today. Again, thanks for listening, and if you're joining us on the computer at curlinglegends.ca or from Facebook, facebook.com/curlinglegends, then just to remind you, you can add comments, but that you can also download apps for your smartphone, such as Stitcher, Downcast, or you can also use iTunes and subscribe to the podcast there. If you've got friends or family members who struggle with technology, please help them listen to the show and get them started. Thanks again to Steve Lobel, who provides the artwork for the show, Mark Rogman, who provided the music, and Jerry Gertz and Curling Zone for supporting the podcast. Ron Northcott owned Alberta Curling in the 1960s. His first appearance at the Brier was in 1963 while playing third for Jimmy Shields. He would then go on to skip Alberta in 5 more Brier appearances that decade, winning 3 of them and going on to win a Scotch Cup as well as 2 Air Canada Silver Broom World Championships with those victories. Although he had a rotating group of thirds, including Jimmy Shields in a return to the squad in 1968, Fred Storey at lead and Bernie Sparks at second were a mainstay on the squad throughout their run. Bernie Sparks would then later move to British Columbia, where he would go on to appear in the Brier 9 more times, including 6 as a skip. Bernie, in fact, was runner-up with British Columbia to the eventual winner Alberta in 1978 in the Brier. That 1978 Brier was won by Ed Lukowich. In the conversation I have with Ron, he talks about losing the 1978 provincial final to Tom Reed. It's actually in reference to the 1977 Alberta Provincials. I really enjoyed our conversation. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Here is my conversation with Ron Northcott. Thanks for taking some time. You're definitely a guy who, in terms of curling circles, you sort of own the 60s to some degree. I think that was sort of your decade for sure, wasn't it?
The 60s were really good to us, yeah. But as good as the 60s were to us, the 70s were equally bad.
Well, let's go right back. So, because you started in, where'd you grow up?
I grew up actually in Vulcan.
In Vulcan, so you were born,
small town Vulcan.
Born there?
Yeah. No, I actually was born where you went through today.
Oh, in Innisfail, okay.
Innisfail, but my parents moved from there to southern Alberta when I was less than a year old. So I've been in Vulcan or the Vulcan area my whole life until I moved to Calgary.
What did your parents do then?
My parents in Vulcan, my dad had a grocery store, and my mom had a ladies' ready-to-wear. Yeah.
So you're one of the curlers that grew up whose dad didn't make the ice and run the curling club.
Because quite a few. And didn't curl, period.
And didn't curl at all.
No.
So what got you attracted to the game in the first?
Well, growing up in a small town back in those days, wintertime, there was 2 things to do. One was to get on the hockey ice, and the other was to go next door to the curling rink. We didn't have a gymnasium like now. Even all small towns like Vulcan, a gymnasium to play basketball and badminton, do all that sort of stuff inside. But we had none of that. So, and we had to fight for ice. We did have a covered arena, which was really special in those days. Probably the only covered arena between Calgary and Lethbridge. And the curling rink was right next to it. And fortunately, the caretaker was kind enough to let kids go in, as long as we didn't chip the ice, and pool around. So I was I was in junior high for sure when I got started, and we started spending time there. And then one of my buddy's dads was a committed curler, and he had a good friend of his who was one of the better curlers.
Committed? Do you mean by just?
Well, he loved the game. Loved the game, and he could see the merits to it. And he had a friend who, over the years, was one of the best curlers in southern Alberta, and that was a guy by the name of Harris Matlock. So between Harris Matlock and my friend's dad, Bev Banks, they sort of got us into the game. We played with the men in the men's league, which was really unheard of in those days.
I was going to say, that wasn't... No. From a lot of people I've talked to, it was a belief that children should be seen and not heard, and so this was just particular to that club, to Vulcan, to the community. They wanted to encourage it.
I think only because of a handful of parents, really, and that were in it and could see the possibilities. Going forward, they were just starting to develop some of these championships, like the Legion had a championship. I don't even know if they had one at that time.
Well, the schoolboy started in 1950, I guess, right? So this would have just been, at what point was this?
Well, I'm talking, actually, we went to this Canadian Schoolboys Championship in 1950. 53 or 54, 53 I think. It was in Saskatoon. First time I was ever on an airplane. We drove to Calgary and then spent I don't know how many hours in a North Star getting from Calgary to Saskatoon, but it was a long time.
How old were you at that point, and how many years had you been?
I think I was in grade 11, so I would have been 16.
And you'd been playing for maybe
so I'd been playing for 7 or 8 years.
7 or 8 years at that point. Okay.
So at least, fooling around for maybe almost 10.
And you had a collection of other kids your age that were into it, or you'd at least convince them to be in, like, so you had a team that you were, because you had to play out of the same school, right? So for sure. Well, and one of my good buddies whose dad got us into the thing, him and I played, and then there was a school teacher who arrived in Vulcan, Vern Coleman, Barry Coleman's dad. And I don't know if you remember Barry Coleman, but he went to one Brier, 1959, I think, with Herbie Olson. And he was a young kid at the time. But he was our skip, and there was myself and Warren Banks and Billy Hansen. But Warren and Billy, we were all in the same grade, and there were only a handful of kids at school. Well, how big is even Vulcan?
At that time, Vulcan was probably less than 1,000, maybe, somewhere in that. It was small.
So even to get to that schoolboys, what was the playoff play-down structure like at that point?
I guess we didn't have to play off within Vulcan.
Yeah.
Well, we had to play off in a district. It was all district play-down throughout southern Alberta. So I think they were divided the same way as the men's were divided. So I think there was in southern Alberta 16 districts. And we ended up playing, most of the time seem like we played off in High River. But anyway, there was lots of teams around. I mean, there were lots of good curlers came out of it at that time. Notably, I guess, when I was still there was Bernie Sparks, who grew up in Claresholm. So we actually curled together in a bonspiel or two when we were both in high school.
Okay, but you battled against him a little bit too,
I did. Well, he ended up played against him. Then we played together and had great success. Then he moved to British Columbia, and our success ended. So I sort of always.
But as a junior, then, was he a nemesis of yours at all, or just?
I don't. He would have been in the vying for the same things we were in southern Alberta. If it wasn't at a bonspiel in Lethbridge or Fort Macleod or whatever, we would have been playing against them. But I don't remember really playing in the year we went to the Canadian. We're talking a long time ago.
Yeah, 53. One thing I noted, I read about that in 52. Yeah, so there was a fellow by the name. It was Art Simpson.
Art Simpson,
right?
Yeah.
So had gone to the Brier, and
that's right. It was
in
52. Yeah.
And so he was from
Bazzano.
Okay, so not too far.
Bazzano would be. Yeah. I guess nowadays it would be probably maybe close to an hour drive from.
So what was your association to him then, or was he someone that you knew then, or?
Well, the earliest recollection I have of Art Simpson is listening to a play-by-play on the radio of Simpson playing Matt Baldwin in an Alberta final. And that wouldn't be the year Simpson went to the Brier because Baldwin won. So whatever year that was, Baldwin won. It might have been, it would have had to been in mid-50s or early 50s because I left Vulcan. I moved to Calgary in 57. So it would have been in the mid-50s somewhere. But I mean, of course, there was no TV in those days or whatever.
But you listened to those those early broadcasts.
I listened,
that was how you got. So did you catch a bug for curling pretty early on then? Was that?
I think that was, at that time, I was really getting into it. So, and obviously it was the early 50s, and in 53, I think, 53 or 54, we went to schoolboys.
53, yeah.
And then we had another crack or two at it, and then didn't get out of Alberta, so. But
what was the schoolboys like then in that era, like the Canadian Championship for juniors? What was it like? What do you remember about the event itself?
Well, the event itself, it was pretty low key compared to the events
today.
To say the least. Now we did play in an arena in Saskatoon.
Really?
Yeah. And there was a meat packing plant there that was a sponsor in Saskatoon, or one of the big sponsors of the thing, because I remember they did a dinner and whatever, but it's certainly not the kind of things that go on nowadays. I mean, it was, we all got there and, I'm trying to recollect, but we had kids at that time.
Yeah. You had some chaperones, I assume, as well, to make sure you stayed on the straight and narrow. Yeah.
Oh, for sure, yeah. For sure, yeah. There was no somebody there to keep an eye on us because we were just in our mid-teen.
But they weren't really coaches, or did you have people that actually taught the game, or was it still learned sort of through, especially with you, without your parents being involved in the game, you probably had to look to others to find out how to develop your strategy or your technique, I guess. Right?
Well, you really, again, it was two guys, Bev Banks, my buddy's dad, and his close friend, Harris Matlock, who was a big-time curler in southern Alberta back in the 50s and late 40s, 50s, 60s even. And he ended up actually being our coach. He traveled with us to the playoffs, traveled with us to the provincial and whatever.
They didn't really have a sanctioned coaches at the time, did they?
No,
or did they? No,
no,
it was just,
no.
but he took the initiative to go with
Yeah,
you.
he just, he was just keen and interested and whatever. So, and it was just getting from like Balkan to Calgary for playoffs or from in the instance, I think we played in the provincial we won was in Edmonton at a club that isn't even there anymore. It was at the far end of the high-level bridge. It was an interesting curling club.
I'm trying to think which one you might mean then, but yeah.
I should be able to remember. Well, it might have been the Royal Glenora.
Okay. There's still a club there, but there's no curling. There's still a Glenora club,
Yeah, I think it might have been. But again, like I say, that was a long time ago.
So you got that taste of national kind of events.
Right.
So was there, at this point, any other sports you're playing at the time as well? Or you're doing stuff in the summer? Or you really just consumed a bit by curling? Like you mentioned there was a hockey rink.
Hockey, I played hockey, and I was really into hockey. And I was actually on the Oil Kings list to go to a training camp, either in the spring or the fall. And the day before Christmas, whatever year it was, I was at the rink and I broke my left arm. And that sort of stopped my hockey dreams right in its track.
Oh, how old have you been at that point?
Probably 15, 14, 15, something like that, 15, 16. I was the same size then as I am now. So, at that time I was sort of big for an average kid. Now I'd be a little guy out there. But then I used to be a couple inches taller.
Well, all the pictures I see of you now have you beside Hector or Ernie Richardson, so those are tricky. It's hard to actually...
Yeah, right. Well,
and even Baldwin was pretty tall.
Yeah, I always think I could look Matt in the eye, but not Ernie. Well, Hector was a big man. I can't remember how tall he was. Yeah. I mean, we spent a lot of time together.
Yeah.
But,
so just coming into juniors, and you, who did you come with? So you mentioned Bernie.
Bernie,
right?
He was part of the group when we were growing up. I never played with him until we were in Calgary and actually playing really competitive.
But who else did you kind of bump into who was coming up through the junior ranks at that time?
I think most of the ones that were coming up at that time didn't stay with the game. I was probably one of the few myself. And our skip in that junior schoolboys team, Barry Coleman, he stayed into competitive curling and he moved around a lot. He was in Lethbridge. Then he ended up in Edmonton, played with Herbie Olsen, went to the Brier with Herbie, and then he ended up in Winnipeg. And he sort of drifted around in the curling world, but I didn't really have much success after the Brier with Olsen, and that would have been 59 the first year Richardson won. So
yeah, but always tricky. I think the balance between career and life, and probably in a lot of cases things got in the way, right? I mean, even in your case, you had a revolving door of thirds a lot of the times on your successful rinks, just because things got in the way, right?
Because of career changes, really. Yeah. The first time we went, George Fink was third. And then George moved back to Regina for a couple of years. And then we talked my old friend Jimmy Shields into playing. And we won. And he said, "That's it, I'm done." He said, "If we play and you win next year, you got to go to Scotland." And I'm not. He hated flying. He said, "There's no chance I'm going to go." So then we ended up getting Dave Gerlach. So that
which
was
is very,
by accident,
but really uncommon. If you think a lot of time about skips, they're sort of connected to a third in a lot of cases, right? But interesting that way, where you were really connected to a front end. But I want to go back before that then. So coming out of the junior ranks and that, so did you, when did you end up in Calgary then?
I ended up in Calgary and I moved to Calgary in 57. And I joined the Calgary Curling Club right away. So it was either winter of 57, 58, or would have been that first winter. I joined the Calgary Curling Club, and because I wanted to play, but I didn't really have anybody to play with.
Well, I was going to say, were you known at all? Was there a way to come in and meet some guys, or did you have to kind of make a name a little bit?
I knew some guys, but it was just guys that I'd curled with out of southern Alberta, and we started curling in the club. And then just the way things worked out, I ended up meeting some of the guys that were the big time serious competitive curlers. Then the first hookup with them would have been 1962 with Jimmy Shields.
So that was the first year. Well, when did you meet Fred originally? Fred Storey.
Fred came when Jimmy and I hooked up. And prior to that, I'd been curling in Calgary and skipping my own team. And we won a spot out of the city in 1959. And let's see, in 1959, 60.
When you're starting out, probably felt like
it was a big deal.
That's a successful season as you're starting out just to get to that stage.
Well, right? Just in those days, first of all, we had to start in the club.
And the Calgary club, I'm sure, was pretty competitive. I would imagine,
it was
right?
even then it was the most competitive club in Calgary. But we would have
Why didn't you choose a less competitive one?
Well, we would have in the neighborhood of 60 teams from the club would go into playdown. And out of that, I think only 2 got to go into the city playdown. So I mean, your
1 in 30
limitations
right off the bat.
Yeah, I mean it's altogether different nowadays. Yeah, I mean nowadays they can't. They don't even have a Southern Alberta playdown. They just have one playdown.
Edmonton City Zone finally, I think 2 years ago they canceled it at the last minute, and then last year they never really even planned on one.
Yeah.
Or starting out, that feels like an accomplishment. Now, were the cash spiels or bond spiels an opportunity as well to play outside of playdowns, or did you?
The big cash spiel in those days was in Lethbridge. First prize was $1,000.
Yeah, for the team.
For the team.
Yeah.
And I remember going the first year I went, again, it was right around 1960, 61 maybe. Would be the first time, and I actually had to stay with a friend of mine in Lethbridge because I didn't have enough money for a hotel room. Went down and played, and I got there, and there was teams from Lyle Dag from Vancouver was there. Ernie was there from Regina. There was 1 or 2 teams from Winnipeg, teams from Saskatoon, all there for first prize of $1,000. And everybody would have to drive, even the guys from Vancouver, Lyle Dag and company, and I got to know them really well later on. They drove from there to play in this 3-day, I think it was 2 or 3 day spiel for $1,000.
So even if you think of the day, even looking at the time value of money and what $1,000 was worth then, still, if you didn't get first place, you probably were paying, it was costing you money to go. And of course, depending what else you did with your time, even the $1,000 probably wasn't financial justification. So it wasn't a car spiel at that point. But there was some car spiel events.
There were car spiels in the 60s, we played in a few in the 60s. Yeah, that's right. Okay. So, there was a couple of ones started earlier than that in Nipawin. I think was the first one, and they had them there. I was too young and too broke to even think about getting to Nipawin. But
so, what was your aspirations then at that point, starting out as a young skip and joining the club? Like, what did you see yourself getting to in curling? What was your early on? Did you have Brier dreams?
Early on, I guess early on you always had that. I always had the Brier dream, but it wasn't something that seemed to be realistic.
Really?
When I was first playing. And until I had some success at the Calgary Club and hooked up with Jimmy, it sort of seemed like maybe he wasn't going to be there.
Where did Jimmy come from then? So
he came out of Sceptre, Saskatchewan.
Oh, okay.
But he'd been living in Calgary for a while when we hooked up.
And he was a bit older than you, or
Jimmy was I think 4 or 5 years older than.
Because at the time, my understanding too, and talking to Matt Baldwin a bit about it, historically, particularly in the 50s, skips tended to be older, right? They tended to be
for the most part.
So by this point, was that starting to change? Like you were
a
younger player?
It would have been.
Jimmy not that old either, right? Because you're both in your 20s. Yeah,
that's right. And Jimmy was at the Brier in Fort William with Stu Beagle, and that would have been in 1960, I think, 1960 or 61. After that Brier, he had a desire to get out on his own, and we'd ended up playing against him quite a few times in playdowns and different things in Calgary. And so anyway, I ran into him on the street actually midsummer, between 60 and between the 60, 61, 62 season.
Yeah.
And
just by accident.
And we were talking, and he said, curling came up, of course. And he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I don't have any plans." He said, "Well, would you be interested in playing third?" And I said, "Sure."
Because you hadn't skipped through junior. As you mentioned, Barry.
No, I played third there.
So you were comfortable with it?
Yeah, no, I was. The question came up, and I said, "Yeah, I sure would." And then we ran into a little bit of a roadblock because the front end that Jimmy had in mind was Ron Baker and Fred Storey. And Ron Baker, Fred Storey, and Jimmy Shields have been doing some curling with Herbie Olsen. Okay. They've been to 2 or 3 spiels, played really well, and Baker and Storey really wanted to get Olsen down to Calgary and play with Jimmy. And I guess Jimmy in the end finally said, "Look, Northcott and I are playing. You want to join us? Great. If you don't, we'll have to find somebody." And I'm pretty sure that's the way he laid it on the line because we ended up together. But they were not keen. But after the first year, everything was okay.
Everything was okay. Well, yeah, so you guys had immediate success then?
Well, we lost in 1962. We lost the provincial final to Hector at the North Hill Curling Club. Last rock that looked like it was heavy at the hog line. Yeah. Storey and Baker both came right off. They were sitting on a bench. Came right off the bench when the rock went by the hog line coming into the house because they were sure they could see it going through the house, which was big time. And that thing just made a little trail ground in, and it wasn't a measure. It was close to a measure, but it was obvious that it stopped just in time. So Gervais went to the Brier, and we went home.
But as much as it was probably a disappointment, maybe even more success than you had thought you guys were going to achieve in that first season.
That's right. No, it was. I was certainly happy with that. But
you're still a young guy this time, right? You're kind of mid-20s and
I was
25, 26, something
early
like that.
Early 20s, early 20s at this time.
So next year we're good. We'll keep Ron.
There wasn't.
No discussion.
The way it
discussion
turned out.
after that.
No, everything was good after that.
Yeah.
And next year we did go to the Brier. Same team.
Did you have some close calls along the way to get through Alberta at that point, or was it?
One right off the bat. Starting at the Calgary Curling Club.
Oh, right out of the club. Yeah.
We lost our first game. It's
a double knockout?
It was double knockout. And there's 60 teams.
Oh, jeez.
We lost our first game to our club manager, a guy by the name of Clarence Irving.
Was it seeded at all then, or was it just
they just drew him out of a hat.
Yeah.
And away you went, eh? So we're down into B, and now we had to win all the way through to get out of the city.
So you probably just even get out of the club, you had to win about 5 or 6 games then at that point.
To get out of the club, we would have had to win at least 5 or 6 games. That's right. And then we had to go in a city play down, and then the South play down, and then the provincials. So it was quite a grind.
But you lost that first one.
Very first game, yeah.
But the provincials themselves were
everything was pretty good. I don't have any.
You don't remember a moment where you thought, obviously losing that first game. You remember that at that point, right? You've got nothing to fall back on. Any mistake out of the club, that'd be something. Yeah. Well, there's lots of stories like that, right? You think about there's a lot of world champions that just this one shot. If somebody would have made that one shot, they're not even in a provincial. Next thing you know, they win the worlds.
That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's happened way more than once.
Yeah.
To a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So that first Brier, that was in
Brandon.
First one was in Brandon. Okay.
First one we went to was in Brandon. Yeah. 1963.
So, what do you remember about that kind of first?
Well, I remember we took the train.
You did? Okay, so...
We took the train from here to Brandon.
But that wasn't the friendship train then, was it? Or
no,
they'd stopped doing that?
No, I think we might have been the only team. Maybe Saskatchewan joined us. I don't know. Yeah, Saskatchewan did.
But it wasn't the train that had Macdonald Brier, the special are all set up and everything.
I don't think so. No, that happened mostly in the Maritime, or in the East when we played in the East.
Well, in the 50s, they talk about how it went right across Canada.
Yeah, well, it might have been. I could have been a Brier train too. I mean, my first time, all I was thinking about was a Brier.
Yeah.
And a lot of things now you look back in retrospect, you really were stupid about, or you could have done things differently. But
really,
but
so
it was,
on that first one, you think that it was?
Well, not necessarily the curling, but the rest of the stuff. You going the first time, even then they were starting to get things organized for the Brier group and the parties and cocktail parties and the hosts that were around and all the rest of it. So are
you saying you enjoyed the first Brier too much, or
no?
No,
I don't think so. No, actually I think we tied for runner-up, and in reality, we had a real shot to win the thing. Yeah.
That was the Richardsons.
The ice was against particularly Jimmy.
Oh, okay. Why is that?
Because he didn't slide very far. He would his slide was just outside the front of the house, and there was a big dip in the ice right where he was letting go of the rock.
Oh, really? Okay.
Oh, yeah. Oh, the ice we played on in those days. The guys nowadays, they wouldn't even play. They'd say, no, we won't play on that, because they would look really bad.
And I always find it interesting that a lot of times and now was that in an arena?
It was in an arena.
That is a lot of times nowadays people look at it and say arena ice is the best ice. And back then it was really the club ice that was preferred, right?
Arena ice was, it was awful. They just didn't do any prep work. They put it in, and you're supposed to play a day or 2 days later. It was not ready. And this thing was not leveled at all. It was, a rock, you had to watch rocks. A rock go out the back of the house, and you had to make sure it didn't come back into the
really?
house. In game.
Could slide downhill while it's just stationary.
Yeah, and you'd hit a rock. There was an area like where Jimmy was releasing a rock in front of the house. If you hit a rock on the nose there, it would back up towards a hog line.
Really?
So you really had...
Because of the indentation.
That's right. Because of the little indentation. And the old ice was made by Herbie Olson's dad, who was supposed to be an expert. But he didn't have enough time to get it done properly. And they didn't give it enough time to mature.
Oh, and they also didn't have the technology today, right?
No.
So to get in and out.
These guys go in and the ice is
it's
perfect.
Yeah.
But,
so it's quite an experience. I mean, and you guys. So at that point, now, how did you and Jimmy get along for, you having been a skip in terms of calling a game and approaching it? Did you kind of defer to him, or did you guys have a kind of a...
We had a good working relationship, yeah. We had our disagreements now and again, and I remember one big spiel we were playing in Vancouver, And we hadn't played together very long, and we were playing again on bad ice. And everybody had missed a hit on a rock, and it was sitting in the 8-foot on the tee line. Front end, 4 front end guys all missed it. And Jimmy said, "You can't make that shot." I said, "Oh, come on, put the broom here, I'll make the shot." So I put the broom down, I went down, missed it by a country mile.
Yeah.
I mean, it was
a weird spot where you just couldn't hit the rock because of where it was.
Well, I remember going into the arena on one of the, maybe it was the same day, and ran into Bill Price, who was playing for Matt Baldwin. And he said, "How'd it go?" He said, "I can tell you right now, there aren't ports big enough to get a rock through." He said, "If it's 4 feet, you don't know whether you can get through or not get through."
Really?
And he was right. Yeah. That was in the Kerrisdale Arena in
It's
Vancouver.
a shame, especially if it's something like a bond spill where you're spending your time to get out there and have that. That's too bad.
It was a big spiel. And we won TVs, so we finished in the money somewhere, but I can't remember what first prize was.
Yeah. How big were those TVs? You need a truck to haul them, or were they?
No, that was before the big ones.
The big ones, okay. Yeah. Black and white then, or color TVs?
Black and white.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So, well, one thing on the strategy side, like how did you then develop kind of your approach to the game? Because and correct me if I'm wrong, you're known as a kind of a trendsetter in terms of an aggressive style or a come around style.
Yeah.
Now, so is that true? Well, first off, is that kind of fair?
That would be a fair statement.
So that wasn't Jimmy necessarily in those days then, was it? Or did that evolve afterwards?
I think it evolved with Jimmy and I. We both had the same ideas of how you could score more than one and do whatever. So, but yeah, and of course, guards were easy to have in place in those days because it was, you tried to peel a rock off the front. It's not like nowadays where you just put the broom down somewhere on the rock or the edge and out it goes. I mean, you take a foot of ice or 18. We used to try and practice peeling rocks, and we'd hit as many on the nose as we'd miss.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a difficult game. So you get a guard out there, you had a chance to really score some points.
So would you even, when you were up, sometimes take an approach to say, rather than try to keep this open, I'm going to be the aggressor? Is that what you guys would do?
I guess that would be dependent.
It's kind of all depending.
Yeah.
And did you often sometimes play different teams different ways? Is that something you thought about?
I think we might have later on, but for the most part, when we started really having a lot of success, our ambition was to be tied after 6 with a hammer. We're talking 12-end games, so we still had a lot of time to maneuver.
That's a small target, really. It's not too aggressive at that point.
No, Well, the big thing that happened to a lot of good teams back in those days, because the ice was so different, is they easy to give up 3 or 4 in the first or second end, and now it's a tough road back.
So you tried. So what you're saying is you weren't aggressive at the chance of being too risky, and you didn't want to put yourself in a position where that could happen. Early on,
that's part of the understanding the team came to. Let's not give anything away until we get the ice figured out. Because it was, no matter where you went, it was always going to be different. So you had to work on getting that under control first, then you could do it. So, but 6 ends is a lot of time. So you get the ice figured out, and then we always figured with the sweepers we had, we just had a great chance.
So next season, Jimmy, as much success as you had, he kind of took a step away.
Jimmy he was very disappointed in his performance at the Brier. Because he'd been to the Brier once before, and he'd had a 100% game, and he played extremely well. And, the ice, I still say it was the ice that got him, And it was a Brier we could easily have won. Ernie might not agree with that, but we were down. It was one rock with Ernie, too. It was the last rock with Ernie that it looked like he'd missed. But
so that really had an impact on, you think, Jimmy's...
It had a big impact on Jimmy. He said, I'm not going to play competitive anymore.
Really?
He said, He said, I'll play in the club and whatever. And, but he didn't,
You guys did not have the same sense. Your thoughts were, we want to get back there. There's, we've got...
Yeah. We all went, Fred and Baker and Storey and Baker and I. Yeah, we wanted to go, and that was the year Mike Chernoff moved from Edmonton to Calgary. So we said, Mike, come on in, and why don't you take over the team and do whatever. And so Mike came in, and we started out the season that way, and then we were in the playdowns and in dire straits in the southern Alberta, the Big Four. And Mike said, he said, I think we should switch. You should skip and I'll throw third.
Oh, because you had brought him in to skip at the time.
We brought him in to skip.
And he'd been skipping most of the season then at that point.
He'd been skipping.
Quite a few games.
That's right, quite a few, So.
Oh, okay, so that's how you got back into skipping. Mike suggested it. Okay.
We flipped it over there. Mike said, I think maybe, and it did turn things around in the playdowns, and I can't even remember now, 64. Bad things happened after Alberta, so I can't remember who we played in the provincial finals even that year. But probably Hector, but I can't remember.
But then, you made it to that Brier. So
went to the Brier.
Return trip, yeah.
Went to the Brier and lost the Brier on day one.
What do you mean lost it on day one?
Well, we were as you mentioned earlier, 12-end game.
That was all the way in PEI, right?
This was in Charlottetown. Yeah. Charlottetown, the snow was up to the rooftop, snow everywhere. And they had just finished putting the ice in the arena. About 1 day or 2 days before we played, we had a chance to practice on it, and it was tough. But anyway, we did. But anyway, day one we played British Columbia, Lyle Dagg, who ended up winning the Brier that year. And they came up to shake hands after 6 ends because they were so far down. And the officials come out and said, you can't quit. You got to play 10 ends. So we said, okay. Yeah. And by now...
And who were officials at this point? Because there's no real...
Curling Association
the Dominion,
had people. There was a Dominion Curling Association at that time. Yeah. So they said, no, you can't do that. Mm-hmm. You got to finish the game. So by this time, where there was water on the ice, I mean, a film of water. The guys would come down, sweeping my glasses. It'd be just like I've been in a rainstorm. Yeah. Anyway, as the game progressed, as hard as I could throw the rock, I could get it to the hack. As hard as Lyle Dagg could throw it, it was about the tee line. And it was impossible to take a rock out, to do whatever. Anyway, the end result was we were so far up they wanted to quit. They won the game.
Because at that point it's a crapshoot.
It was a nightmare.
Guys,
it was.
So you can take any rocks out. It's hard to hold a lead when you can't take a rock.
The Curling Association, Dominion Curling Association, had a meeting as to whether or not they would start the whole thing over.
Really?
After that particular draw. And somebody in there decided, no, let's leave it the way it is. But they were going to move it to a curling rink where we had decent ice. And they didn't. And anyway, and we took a long time to get our footing back.
Was the ice it's a
struggle? It got better as the day went on. Yeah, by the end of the week, you could make shots and whatever. It wasn't perfect. It was still typical old arena ice. But no, it was fine after 2 or 3 days. Yeah. But that first day was...
And Lyle ends up going on to win it.
And he ended up winning it, And
I think, Ernie talked about having actually that was his last run as well, and having a good shot that year as well. So, but at this point now, you've been there 2 years in a row.
That's right.
At that point, are you starting to think this is going to happen every year, or are you?
Well, now, you start. After when you're there 2 years in a row, now all of a sudden, boy, you really want to go back. I mean, it's
at this point you're in kind of you're into your later 20s, I guess. And
I would be in my mid. Yeah, I'd be 25 or 20.
Were you doing other things in terms of career or life, or were you able to kind of balance it, or were you really consumed in the?
No, I mean there wasn't the spiels like there are today. Yeah. So I managed to utilize my vacation time curling, and everybody else in the office played golf. So I was happy to be stuck in the office in the summertime because I didn't play golf. And the guys I worked for were very considerate. Mm-hmm. But I do remember in 1963, I didn't have any vacation time left because I'd used it all up in the playdowns getting to go to the Brier. I had to go in and talk to the head honcho. And I said, look, I got a problem here. And I said, I'd be happy to take time off without pay or whatever. And anyway, he looked at me and he said, look, just go. Play your best, win the damn thing if you can.
Curling had built up a bit of an exposure enough that even people that maybe weren't close to it knew that this means something. That's
right.
Important.
Yeah, it was, and we were in the good times with respect to that and with respect to the publicity. Because if you won Southern Alberta, you'd be front of the sports page in the Calgary Sun at the time and the Calgary Herald. Yeah.
And Larry had started writing at that point about curling, right?
A little bit later.
A little bit later? Okay.
A little bit, yeah. And he was probably in the mid-60s.
Yeah, because I know he talked about he kind of came up as you were coming up.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But we would get, and then if we won Alberta, I mean, the coverage was, our pictures are in the paper every day. I mean, I go downtown today and go into a place, buy something, and the guy will look at me and he said, he's still curling. Yeah. and I said, well, thank you very much, but it's been a long time.
It's been a while.
So, yeah. Okay. So that was just the kind of the publicity we got. Now, the top 10, 12 teams that are playing every week in the Grand Slam get all the television, but other than that, nobody knows a curler from anybody.
So then in 65, did the team stay the same in 65, or was that?
No, in 65, and I can't remember what happened. 65, after that Brier, we sort of decided to go our own ways. I forget what happened. Mike went one way, and Baker decided that he'd had enough, so there was just Fred and I. and we ended up getting Ray Werner moved to Calgary, who used to play with Hec Gervais. We picked him up and picked another kid up from the Calgary club and went into the playdowns, and we lost in the South, and that was 65.
And was that a bit of a shock all of a sudden when you?
Well, it was a disappointment.
Not going this year. What?
It was a disappointment, but it was a new team. And we struggled a little bit. We never were quite at the top of our game. And anyway, we didn't win. Nick Lashuk won, represented Alberta in 1965, went to Saskatoon.
Yeah. And that was the one that Bronstein came back and returned to the Brier and won it. I want to ask you a bit about that, because there's a bit of history related to Bronstein that I've heard from different folks about Bronstein in 65 and then following that Brier, and a little bit about a Brier you were in with Alfie Phillips. And there's, I guess what I want to ask you about is the history of the corner guard. And sort of who developed and started there's some stories that talk about how it really was driven in Ontario, like using it as a different strategy.
That's not true.
That's what I want to know. Like, what's your perspective on it? Because I've heard different stories, and I've heard people say that Terry Bronstein was a big part of it. And then I've heard you and some of the
we always played. We didn't in those days didn't call him a corner guard.
Okay,
like they do now. But we played
just a guard.
We played those all the time. I mean, that was part of our game. And that was
from as long as you could remember. Like, was there a point in time where you can think about where you changed it, or that just from your?
Well, no, I think it was Jimmy. Even right from the time I started playing with Jimmy, Jimmy liked to play it, and we might have been one of the first teams that used to throw rocks into the house from the outside in around the guard instead of coming down the center line and whatever. At that time, everybody would generally play down the center to go around the guard. Yeah. Either the in turn or out turn, depending where the guard was. But we took the other approach, came from the outside and in, and if you could get it close, a lot of times in those days, particularly, the ice out there, you threw a little bit of weight, it would fall out to the board. So if you got a rock half buried, it was probably going to be safe. Nowadays,
because they couldn't throw any weight to get it.
Couldn't throw the weight to get it. Yeah. So it paid off for us a lot of times. Mm-hmm. So I think it went way back to the early 60s for us, as far as I'm.
In 66 or the 65-66 season, that's where you get your return to the Brier and you get through and finish the job. Right?
That's right. Yeah.
But there's, I guess, but that was the first year then with Bernie, right?
That's right.
So how did that come about then, the formation of that team?
By accident. Totally by accident.
Total accident, okay.
Totally accident. I'd been playing that year.
Well, you'd already started the season
with the team. Fred and I had been playing together, stayed together.
Yeah. Before we get there, what was that relationship with Fred like then? Because, you played for a lot of years.
It was good, we were always, he always stayed. He stayed until, until we got, until I guess the 70s, really.
And you guys, but it went kind of beyond curling too? Like you guys became...
Yeah, not as much as Jimmy and I. Jimmy and I became really close friends, and we ended up in the horse business for several years and did a lot of different things together. Jimmy and I did become really good friends.
Mm-hmm. And was Fred possibly one of the strongest or sweepers around, I guess, as well?
I think so, yeah. He was... He learned very early judging rocks, and he took it as a challenge.
Did everyone do it effectively then, the judging? No. Or did some people even just rely on the back end to tell them?
I mean, I think it was a combination. Yeah. I think the good teams,
always,
like Ernie's front end and Hector's, Wally Ursulak and the guys he had playing front end, Warren Hansen, whatever. I mean, they were into the same thing, but Fred was a real personal challenge for Fred. He, to make sure, if I hollered out of my hand, he said he could always tell if I was desperate or whatever. And if I wasn't desperate, he always take a second look before he started pounding.
Because I could imagine, particularly in the corn broom days, a lot of times guys just get into the motion and all of a sudden you could sweep too much because you've sort of, got too caught into it. Whereas,
right.
I think, with the push broom, it's a little more, you're sort of a little more in control what you're doing. Whereas, the aggressive motion of pounding it out.
That's right.
All of a sudden you've pounded out maybe 5 too many, for 5 feet too long, and all of a sudden
it's gone. Right? Yeah, it's gone. So it's that was a whole different game when you had the corn brooms, and a lot of times we played 3 games in a day, 12-end games.
Is that why you skip?
In retrospect, I could easily say yes.
Yeah. And so getting back to that team. So how did the team get formed? So it was
We started out the season, Fred and I, and we had a guy by the name of Ron Borgstrom was playing third. We went to Lethbridge, almost won the same old rainbow spiel that we'd
$1,000
been going to forever. I think it was still probably $1,000 then. I'm sure it was. But anyway, Ron worked for, I think, a company called Northwest Trust. He said, I can't go. I said, well, surely, what's only going to be played? It was a car spiel in Edmonton. And I had an entry in.
Was this had just started, or is it had been out for?
No, I think it was the first year they had it. Had the thing in Edmonton, and maybe the second. And Hector was part of the organizing group.
But you had
whatever.
Had you played in a car spiel before, or this was your first opportunity?
I think I played in one with Jimmy in Swift Current, which we didn't win.
And at the time, like this was an event, right?
Oh yeah.
This was an event that would draw fans. This was because it was a big opportunity, right? Outside of the playdowns in the Brier, this was
a big deal.
Yeah,
like I can remember car spiels in Calgary that we played in, but I remember going to the final one year and watching Ernie and Hector play, and the corral was essentially full. Yeah. I mean, you don't see that nowadays. I mean,
not even these Grand Slam events. Yeah.
No, the only Grand Slam event I've ever seen where the seats are full was the past one in North Battleford.
Yeah. Well, Okotoks did a really good job too earlier in the season.
I didn't see much of that Okotoks one.
Yeah, they did all right, but okay. So you're off. You got to get to Edmonton, but your third can't make it.
Can't make it. So anyway, Borgstrom was a good friend of George Fink and also of Sparks. And he said, George and Bernie have got an entry in too. Phone them.
Yeah.
I said, they're not going to play for me. And I said, we want somebody to...
So that was your first reaction right off the bat. You said they would. Yeah. Why'd you think that?
Well, I don't know. I just, I knew both of them and I'd known them for a long time, but they sort of seemed to be set in what they were going to do, and they were going one way. And anyway, Ron kept pushing me, and I was officing in the same tower that he was. He was down on the main floor, and I used to go down and have coffee and say, come on, have you changed your mind? Because I got the entry in it. We got to go or I got to cancel. Yeah. And he kept saying, phone Sparks or phone George.
So this went on for a little while.
And it went on for a little while. No, so anyway, I finally did. And anyway, and I can't remember whether it was George or Bernie. I think it was George. Said, sure, we'll go. So we did. We went, George played third, Sparks played second.
And how was that? How was that determined? George at the time, or they just...
George was skipping the other team, but when I asked him if they wanted to come and play for us, they just, that was just set up without...
This is what we'll do, okay.
Yeah, there was no discussion. Yeah. It was just...
So it's not like you had any say in it.
No, they were happy to come, or they wanted to go. They wanted to go as bad as we wanted.
And it was a bonspiel, right? And I'm sure at the time, right, a lot of teams just would sometimes form or grab guys and go to bonspiels, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So anyway, we went and we won the cars. We drive the cars home after the spiel from Edmonton. And I remember coming in off the...
Do you remember the car? What were the cars?
Oh, it was a Chev they don't even make anymore.
Oh, yeah.
It was red. I remember that. It was a two-door thing.
All four of them were red?
They're all the same, I think. and we drove them all home. And we stopped by the old airport. You turned in to get into Calgary. It would be, I can't even remember the street now. And everybody's now going to go a different direction. We all got out. It was blowing. It was cold and snowing. And I said, what are you guys doing for the playdowns? And they said, well, maybe we should go on the playdowns. And somebody said, yeah, let's do it. And that's all there was to it. Yeah. I mean, it was never any follow-up phone calls. I mean, there was follow-up phone calls because the playdowns were starting. We had to make sure we get the entry.
Yeah, because it was pretty close at that point to get into playdowns, close, right? You had to put the entry in and everything else. Okay. And then from there, from
there it was great.
It was just rolling.
Yeah.
And so it was a natural fit. And so at that point, you're probably very comfortable as a skip. So there wasn't any bringing these new guys on. There wasn't any contradiction or areas where George or Bernie, because they'd had skipping experience where they wanted to play a different way. It was
never came up.
Never came up. Did you collaborate sometimes then on either in-game decisions or going into games, or was it still more we defer to Ron skipping and we'll let him?
Yeah, I think it was just George playing third. We worked together really well right from the start. Yeah. And I think we all sort of played a very similar game anyway.
Yeah, and they enjoyed playing an aggressive that style.
Yeah. So
because it's probably fundamentally it's where teams would contradict each other, is where someone wanted to be aggressive and someone else wanted to be more of a hitting style, right? And that's probably where conflict could occur.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, obviously you must have been an easy guy to play with or play for, because you had you had success with every third you played with. So. Almost so.
Yeah, it worked out. For whatever reason, I don't know.
So that one, so 66, and that was with
Halifax.
Okay, yeah. So another trip way out to the Maritimes.
Yeah, and that was great, eh? And by now the Brier is really getting to be a big deal. Yeah, I think
So you even notice it, like the difference is when you mean a big deal, you mean a big deal just locally within Alberta or Canada wide, or you just saw?
Yeah, well, locally.
What did you see?
Locally too. I mean, in terms of fan participation and the conditions you played under, the arena and whatever. They were, each year they started getting a little bit better. So never to where they are the kind of conditions they play on nowadays. But
were you getting any TV coverage yet, or did that start later? Or that they started doing a bit of.
We had some TV coverage. Actually, had
that's right. Yeah, because there was some back in. Yeah, because I've seen clips. Some of they put together the programs, right?
Yeah.
They would go tape it all and then build a kind of a showcase afterwards.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. No, I remember playing in the South. The first year I skipped a team out of Calgary, and Ed Whalen was there from CTV Calgary or whatever, CFAC Calgary.
Oh, just for the Southerns.
And set up a tripod out there on the ice behind the sheet ice. Was doing some shots and then sent it back to Calgary. So.
So even at that point in the playdown.
There was some. And of course at this time out of Saskatchewan they used to do live radio broadcasts every game. So and Alberta did a lot of it too.
And then so you head to that Brier. You're feeling pretty good about your team. You guys had a lot of success as well in, or I guess it was just played. You hadn't really played anything else. You won the cars.
Won the cars, and then
But the playdowns there was an uneventful experience then. Was it?
As I recall, it was. I can't remember. I can't remember now who we played in the provincial final. But I don't recall any situation where it looked like we were. Not going to get go all the way.
But then in '66, so at that Brier though, you did end up in a playoff, right? So how did the week evolve then at that point? And what got you into how did that you recall? Was it a bit of stumbles or was it just?
I can't remember. I can't remember who we lost to. I remember the playoff was against Ontario and Joe Goroka. And that it went down to the last rock too, and it was a close game. And I started very poorly myself playing in that game, and I remember telling the story. I said, "Just hang in there. We're going to get this back." And we finally got it back, but we played the last end of the extra end without the hammer and won.
And stole
we stole.
So even going into that game, how did you had some Brier experience at that point. How did you feel? Did you feel confident, or was there?
I think I don't recall. I'm saying, "Geez, we got no chance here," or whatever. It was a Brier, so I mean, it was the first time. So
Ontario wasn't really a powerhouse like it is now, right? It was
no. That didn't develop.
Joe had some surprising success, I guess. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. Joe played. That was probably the best Ontario maybe had done in quite a while. But it was quite a while after that before Russ surfaced and started to take over.
Was that the first ever Silver Broom?
It was.
Or that was a Scotch Cup still that year, right? I think
it was a Scotch Cup that year.
Okay.
Yeah, Scotch Cup in Vancouver.
And it was in Vancouver, so it was in Canada. There was so it was a smaller. There was the other countries are all involved at this point, but it was a smaller mix still, right? It wasn't was it?
I think there was only 8 teams at that time. So it was a much smaller mix, and there was the Americans and the Scots were the two teams you had to fear, and the rest of them at that time were just sort of brand new to the game.
Did you really fear them though, Ron, or did you have a confidence as being like at that point? Although at that point, I think so. The year before, Bronsteed had lost, and actually, I think had been the first Canadian team to lose.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So was there going into it then? Was there any kind of attention to that, or did you guys feel any of that going in, or did it almost seem like a little bit of an afterthought after winning the Brier?
It was more of an afterthought after winning the Brier, but it all changed after the first game, which we won, and they played the national anthem. And all of a sudden you realize, what's going on here, and you're representing the country and the whole thing. So now the significance of it all changed from just being, we got to go to this because we won the Brier. And I mean, it's still the Brier was for sure the biggest deal for us.
And you're in Canada, and
we're in Canada.
Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting. And it hadn't been to Canada before. Was that the first or not?
No, it had been in Canada because
not often though.
It was played in Calgary in '64.
It was.
Lyle Dagg played.
That was the first in.
I think that was probably the first.
Yeah, because prior to that, it started in Scotland and was there each year when Ernie.
That's right.
So you weren't sure what to expect, but that moment when you were sitting there and you realized, oh wow, I'm wearing a Maple Leaf like this.
Yeah, that was it was not until we got to Vancouver for sure. And started to get in the mix of things. And then we played an unusual guy. The Americans had an unusual guy out of North Dakota, I think it was. Joe, he was out of Fargo. Okay. Everybody called him Fargo Joe. He was a dentist, but he had a positive theme thing going within himself that he was the best team in the world and he could not be beat. And it turned out that there was 2 or 3 teams that didn't have a lot of trouble with Fargo Joe.
Oh, so the power of positive thinking isn't always successful.
That power. And he was a dentist, I think, if I recall correctly. But yeah.
So next season, there's at that point, George moved back to.
Oh, George was with us again.
With you again in
67.
67. Okay.
That was the year Alfie Phillips.
Now, again, at this point, you might be thinking, okay, this is a bonspiel each season, or I guess you don't take it for granted, I'm sure, right?
I don't think I ever did, but
At this point, though, you must have been building up some presence within the Alberta, in particular Southern Alberta, where you even went into bonspiels, or you go into a playdown, other teams are starting to almost kind of, like, are they getting up for you, or are you finding it's a case like, it's a bit of an intimidation factor? Not that you mean to be intimidating, just that they know they're playing you at that point.
I think by now, they definitely... We're getting up for the games, and
like it's an advantage almost. Right?
Yeah, that's right.
The Richardsons had a bit of that too, right? They used to say they could throw 2 up on the board before it started.
Right. Yeah. So it was in some cases that wasn't always the case.
Not always the case.
No,
you played a lot in Alberta at that point. You're having some success. We don't have to focus specifically on 67, but just in general, were there some guys and some that maybe we haven't heard a lot about, like people other than Hector, but people that were you'd bump into, people that maybe even had your number once in a while, or were there some...
there was a couple of guys in Calgary that ended up having our number and actually knocked us out of the provincial playdowns a couple of times.
Who was that?
I can see the guy. I can't remember. It was unbelievable. He just didn't seem to matter.
Maybe you've blocked out the name because of the pain is too much. Yeah.
It was really bad.
Yeah. I'm assuming at your own club, there was probably a lot of guys that just felt like, oh, okay, it's just Ron. We can.
Yeah, right.
That might sometimes be the most competitive event you're in.
That's right. Yeah, the club was, So the club and the South too. There was teams in Southern Alberta that were good teams. Eh?
And did you see at this point the style of game changing? Like the Richardsons were very much known as a very incompetent but hitting team, and they could really control the game. And then the style that you started developing, and we talked a little bit about how other teams call claim to the corner guard game.
Right.
But did you see the game evolving through the 60s then and becoming even a more entertaining, or even a more, like, were other teams starting to take a similar approach?
Well, not really, because now, as the 60s progressed, the ice started getting better. So now you're seeing these guys that really like to hit.
Okay, so hitting has a resurgence now because of the conditions.
Because of the conditions, so hitting got to be a big thing. So now you'd see a 1-0 game or a 2-1 game. I mean,
really?
Just
okay, so that
in a 12
hitting
game and whatever in a 12-end game,
Now, so were you involved in any of those?
I don't think we were. No,
you wouldn't want to, I'd imagine, right? Like,
I mean, that's why they had to come up with the new rules.
Well, no, but I wasn't even aware that even that started in that towards the late 60s, where that was happening. That those kind of games were happening.
There was a couple of teams out of Saskatchewan. They just that's what if they won the toss, they were going to try and win 1-0. And on good ice, you had a chance. But I mean, the ice still came into play, and it wasn't a wide open hit. And peeling a guard wasn't automatic.
When the corn and how you could try to manage the corn on the ice conditions too was hard. It's certainly hard, right? Because you're going to get more movement on hits ultimately a lot of times too, didn't you?
Well, we definitely would get more movement, but we never saw that as a problem. I guess because we played with corn brooms, grew up with them and played with them, and I wasn't...
So you knew how to read them and you knew how to adjust for it, and you just sort of let a rock catch the chaff, or you could at certain points, or how would you actually...
Well, it depended on what kind of a shot it was. If we're talking about a soft takeout or a critical draw, I mean, lots of times we'd lightly keep the ice clean. Because if you let it go, and it got something, I mean, it really take off on you. So, but I never saw it. I think I've seen more what they call picks nowadays in the last 10 years or 20 years than we ever saw, with all the straw we had and all the straw we played in the ice. And with guys like Sparks and Storey sweeping, I tell you, they broke those broom downs.
Well, how many brooms would they go through in an event?
Oh, in an event,
like a Brier, how many?
Brier probably 4 or 5.
Each?
At least. Then it would depend on ice conditions too. Okay. I mean, at Halifax Brier, the first game, they threw away 2 or 3 brooms. They get so waterlogged, you couldn't even use them.
So that 67 was in. Oh, that was Ottawa. That was a centennial in Ottawa. But it was actually in Hull, I guess. Right?
That's right.
Yeah. So that, like you mentioned, Alfie Phillips out of Ontario, which was a bit of a surprise win again because Ontario hadn't had a lot of success. And how did you guys finish up? What was as a defending champion?
I think I'm not sure. I think we ended up about 3rd or something.
Yeah.
We were, I think, 5-0 halfway through the week, and playing the best we'd ever played.
Oh, really? Yeah, even more so than some of those other Briers.
Yeah, ever. The whole team had really...
Because it was the second year you had the same third.
That's right.
Didn't happen a lot after that.
No. But we were really on a roll, and everybody was confident. I guess I wouldn't say, I don't think we ever got to the point where we were arrogant, overconfident, never overconfident. Yeah. I mean, there was too many close calls for that. But we were just playing good, and we were playing. I think it was Bruce Hudson, Manitoba that year, and I was backing up over the hog line and fell, and I whacked my shoulder. And I continued to play, but Storey always maintained that's what stopped us in that Brier.
Did you feel like you had problems throwing the rock afterwards, or was
I don't recall that I did.
Like it?
But I don't think that I played the way I had been playing. But anyway, it was a major disappointment because we were playing so well. And the field that year was not as strong as some of the fields we played in. So of all the Briers we played in, and including all the ones we won, that one, in my mind, we really should have won.
And seemed to be playing the best. Like
and was playing the best when we started, and through the early part of it.
And then after that year, that's when George then moved back.
And George moved, following summer.
So obviously that's not a curling decision for George. That's a
career.
That's a career decision, and which happened, I'm sure, right? It's, two Brier trips, but there's other things to pursue in life, right?
Well, there was at that time. There wasn't the same sort of money in curling or same sort of possibilities, and there weren't as many events. So you could actually have a job and really sort of look after your job and include the curling
and be the tops in Canada and be competitive.
That's right.
So now you're back to the drawing board. Have to find someone else.
And we came up. Dave Gerlach had moved to Calgary, and he'd played for Gervais a few times, and we'd run into him in different spiels. And so everybody said, let's talk to Gerlach. And he came, and he had a sensational year with it.
But did Jimmy play with you a little bit? Well, Jimmy played with you, though. Jimmy Shields came,
we're talking about, that's 68.
Yeah, 68, yeah.
Oh, okay. No,
yeah, so when
68, George went back, that's right.
Yeah,
that's right. George went back.
You've had so many thirds, you're starting to lose track.
I'd never forget Jimmy.
Yeah.
But
you pulled him out of retirement.
We pulled him out of retirement.
Yeah.
It was over.
Because was George leaving? Was it last minute? Like he left?
No, I guess we knew. I think we knew at the end of the curling season that he was going back to retirement.
And then Jimmy needed. And at that point, having left the game, was Jimmy feeling remiss about? Like you'd now had a lot of success, right?
Right.
And he had really had that very kind of emotional experience losing that Brier so closely.
That's right.
Was there a sense like that, even from your side, Jimmy, you should have been there with us, or was there a bit of that feeling as well?
Well, and I'm not sure that we got to that part of it, because it was really his decision to sit it out. Yeah. But he did keep playing, so it wasn't.
Oh, he did. So it wasn't just like not competitive. He wasn't.
He wasn't competitive.
He wasn't going to that big Lethbridge spiel.
I think he actually even took his club team and went to play down.
Oh yeah.
Just to play, because he liked to play.
Okay. That season you said, let's.
So it was an easy, and everybody on the team said, Storey, Sparks said, let's get Jimmy if we can.
And Sparks at this point was comfortable in the front end position and playing second.
Yeah,
he never really.
He always, he was. Yeah. He liked second. He played second, and he was good at it.
So your original concern about him taking that position and playing with you wasn't really a problem at all.
Turned out to be no problem at all. No.
And probably an advantage. Ultimately, because a lot of times seconds weren't always the strongest player on the team, and sometimes guys would pick up, and you had someone there that could skip.
He was, and he was.
And did show that later.
Oh, yeah, he moved to BC and dominated curling out there for years. I mean, he was a player. And I don't know how he could maintain his desire and focus for as long as he did.
Did yours start to wane then?
Not really. I mean, I still love to play, and I love the playdowns, but when I left the game, it was because I had an opportunity to start my own company, and it was just not going to work. So
now you're back with Jimmy, probably fit in perfectly, and did you roll through Alberta then at that point as well, or was there some hurdles? Was there any recall scares?
I don't recall any. I don't. There probably was some, but I don't.
There always are, like we said.
There's always some, and there's always instances where it could have gone wrong the other way. I can remember playing in one final at the Calgary Curling Club that we could have been out of, and it was last end, and I threw the rock and I got it out just a bit, and my heart stopped.
Yeah.
And the rock turned out perfect, but I thought that I had not thrown it the way I intended to. And that would have put us out that year, whatever year. I don't even remember what year it was now.
But it was that a year you went through to the Brier?
I think it was one of the years, one of the years we went all the way.
Yeah. You can remember the experience, or certainly the sensation probably of it, right? The minute you let it go. And then, and were you one of the guys that afterwards said, threw it exactly, you own up to it?
I think I just ignored it.
Because, some guys, they'll miss a shot by a little bit and they'll make it and say, that's what I meant to do.
I do that on the golf course.
Oh, yeah.
Whatever,
sure.
I get lucky.
You go to Kelowna in 68 and win again. You probably never felt like this was a nuisance to go to the Brier. Was it the same thrill and experience every time?
Every time.
Never.
No, I
never got old. Yeah.
I think it always got more exciting.
Really?
I mean, it was just great always to go back. Hey?
Yeah.
And so Kelowna was a good story. It was still just round robin play, and it was close. Mm-hmm. The thing I remember about Kelowna, we were playing Pickering in the last game, and we had to win the Brier. There was some guy in the stands trying to get my attention, and I ignored him. We were on the side sheet, and he was up there hollering at me, and he said, "Look at this, look at this." I didn't look, Didn't turn around. I finished the end. It turned out I had to throw a last rock to win the game, and I find out afterwards the guy had the Kelowna newspaper of the day, and it had the headlines were Northcott wins a Brier. If we'd have lost that game, we'd have been in the playoff with Pickering.
So either they want to get the edition out early, or maybe they didn't even know how the playoff system worked.
I think they just got the edition out early, and we'd been playing well, and we were playing on really bad ice.
So comparing the shot in 6-6, where it was a playoff game against Goroka, versus you're making a last shot where still in the back of your mind you're not losing if you miss a shot. Did that change your approach the shot at all, or does it still have the same amount of nerves? Did you feel like? And
it's still, I think it's still the same. It was the same. One in with Goroka. We had to get a roll. I mean, we had to get a hit, get a roll, and then the ice just killed Joe. I mean, we got exactly what we wanted, and he played a shot, and instead of his rock curling, it just drifted out.
Plus, it's a case where he had the final shot, so
That's
you're not in that. In here, you're in the position where you're making that final.
Yeah.
And I guess the other thing at the time, there's not a whole lot of sports psychologists, or that hadn't really come up. So did you have a sense then, like you'd had a lot of success at this point? Now you've won again in 68. You'd been there a number of times. Do you attribute it to anything? Like, was it something that you just think came naturally? Was it something you inherently felt? You seem like you're probably fairly unassuming. You're, in terms of your leadership qualities, did you tend to be a little more of kind of low key, or what was?
I think I was always sort of low key, and I guess everything sort of came out of just my love for the game. I mean, it was we went through a period. I mean, it was just great to play. I mean, I loved to play, and I loved to compete, and we were lucky to have the success we did for sure.
And it sounds like too that there was always, of course, the goal, but it sounds like you could always stay in the moment and just enjoy that moment, and not always catch yourself getting too far ahead of yourself.
Oh yeah.
Like the reason you didn't want to see what this guy was hollering about, because in particular, you don't want to, again, getting back to that idea of, if you think about the way, these sports psychologists think now, it's all about being in that moment.
Right.
So it sounds like you just naturally had a good ability to be in the moment and not ever get too far ahead.
I don't think we ever got too far ahead of ourselves. I mean, that wasn't part of.
Because in retrospect, that looks easy. But I'm sure it wasn't. Never.
In retrospect,
So 68. Now that was the first Silver Broom then. What was the contrast there, being when Air Canada got involved, and what was the event like then versus that Scotch Cup that you'd been to 2 years previous?
Well, the best part was when we traveled, we got to travel first class. When we flew, and so that was
and you had with an entourage, right? You had you'd have people from the Alberta, so Ray Kingsmith then would he travel for some of that as well and be part of it?
He went to a lot of it. He was a good friend of mine.
Okay, well, we'll talk about Ray, but he's pretty instrumental in curling, and not someone that a lot of people know about.
He did a lot. He did a lot for curling. Yeah, and he had a lot of things figured out long before they came into play the way they were, and he could, he got involved at a time when some of the, there used to be,
was he a player though then originally, or when he started? Obviously, he's became a builder, and certainly a phenomenal one.
Oh yeah,
but
he
the
curled
sport
a lot.
Did he?
Actually, we curled in the club together for quite a few years, and.
But he had a love of the game.
He was, he was just
genuine.
He was one of the really good people. And my last experience with him was '88 when he chaired the Olympics for when it was a demonstration sport for the Olympics in Calgary, and I was the honorary chair. And so we ended up spending a lot of time together. And then as he died the following summer, it was really sad because he just retired and he was going to do all this traveling, met all these people through curling, and everybody liked to have him come and visit. So he was going to go everywhere.
He was a character then. He was a likable character. And,
everybody loved him. The media guys all loved him. He was part of the media group. He was part of the curlers. He was everybody. Yeah.
And you need people like that in a growing sport, right, that's evolving to help kind of move it forward.
That's right. And he was great at sports banquets, different emceeing anything. He was always good at it, but he always had, curling was one of his big loves. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because I talked with Warren Hansen at length, and it's interesting how him and Ray were involved quite a bit, but Warren seems very different, right? Warren's not maybe the warm socializing guy.
That's right.
He's more the worker. Let's do the hard work, and take the lumps, and they probably worked pretty well as a team in those early days.
I would think they did, yeah. And Warren had his ideas were all good too. I mean, and he initiated a lot of things into what goes on at the Brier with nowadays in the Brier patch with, depending on what city the Brier is in, getting curlers that had played in the Brier out to, for one-on-one with the crowd or open the thing up. Did a lot of good things and always looked after the curlers. He was
going back in your era as you're having success in the 60s. Did you see curling as potential Olympic sport, or was that because the Olympics were starting? I don't know if they started to become a thing in the broader sporting world, like at that time. Television was more common, right? So now it's in people's homes and people are starting to see the Olympics. And of course, a few years later, when it comes to Montreal, it's got some amazing exposure. But did you, back in that time when you're winning these Briers and having success and you go to this Air Canada Silver Broom, are you at an Air Canada Silver Broom thinking, hey, all the countries are here, maybe?
Well, I can take you back a little further than that with respect to the Olympics. 1963, we went to the Brier in Brandon. We had to sign a letter of consent, I guess you'd call it, that we agreed that if we won the Brier and they got curling into the Olympics in 1964 in Norway, that we would represent Canada. They were trying in 64. Finally got it in 96.
Yeah.
Or 98. That's how long?
98.
98, okay, 98.
Yeah, officially.
That's how long it took. Yeah, wow, we had demonstration here in 88.
Yeah.
Then they had demonstration
in Albertville.
In Albertville, yeah, they had demonstration there. That's right. Yeah, it was in the Olympics in Salt Lake City. But that's where the association was trying that far back. So it took from 63 till the 90s.
So when you signed that, did you think you were going? Did you think it was or did
the Olympics weren't the kind of deal they are now, and we barely had television still.
No, but even looking around and looking at curling at the time, you still had a Canadian championship sponsored by a cigarette company, and
that's right.
A lot of the social aspect of the game is well known, and I think part of its charm, right, that it's a very social game and people are accessible and all that. Did you guys manage to kind of avoid the the partying atmosphere sometimes, or did you how did you approach these events? Like when you went to Briers, did you try to change your style, or did you going to the Brier, we were serious about playing, but we also we socialized a little. There was back for many years. There was a guy out of Ontario, Colin Campbell, and he used to what he called morning classes. Morning classes.
Yep. And everybody was expected to go to morning classes.
They're still there.
Morning classes was a real shot of gin with his special concoction. It was very good.
So players would go to this too, then.
But everybody was invited. Okay. As a player, you were, I think, expected to show up. Not necessarily if you were playing immediately after.
Not that morning, probably. No.
And so certainly we didn't make morning classes like we would have if we'd been spectators and been invited. But we did. Yeah. But really, the rest of it really, everybody liked to have a beer for sure and whatever, but we were always very careful, I think, about where we went. We played first and then we partied after. So.
Well, I love Matt Baldwin's story about that Brier he went to where they took the train all the way, east, and he says that's probably what undid him was that trip.
That trip, yeah.
On that train. And his next go around, they were a little more careful. Because Matt sounds like someone who really loved the social
Matt
part
liked
of
the
the
party,
sport.
Matt liked the party for sure, yeah.
No, and I mean, I think it's a great appeal of the game because you think about other sports where the athletes are so distant from the actual fans, right? And
right.
Curling still, and I think it's there's always a risk of it starting to happen now, but that's so important, right? I think that regular guy, even though now a lot of these teams aren't regular guys, right?
No,
they're really becoming in line with professional in terms of the time that they
exactly
and effort. But it's nice to think that they're as friendly guys you can have a beer with, right?
Yeah,
and I think
that's right.
I hope the sport never loses that for sure.
Yeah, I would. I would hope it wouldn't either, and I doubt that it will. But you never know.
That's the danger.
The money keeps getting bigger and whatever, and if it manages to do that. But it's come a long way since.
So the first Air Canada Silver Broom was a little bit more. So did it seem like there was a little more to do about it then as well, or?
The Scotch Cup people did a really good job.
Okay, so it didn't feel a whole lot different other than it was a return trip, and you probably had the same. Did you have the same goosebumps when you?
Oh yeah, and it was the first Silver Broom was in Point Claire, which is sort of home to Air Canada and their home base and whatever. But from a event viewpoint, it was pretty small. I mean,
really?
It was in Point Claire. So, I mean, curling today in Toronto, Montreal, those big cities, the fans don't come out.
Yeah.
They just, they really take something special. And even in Brier and the smaller centers will fill the houses. It did in Ottawa or Oshawa, for sure. But in Point Claire, it was played in an arena, but the crowds were sparse.
Really? Yeah. I wonder if Air Canada at the time was a bit concerned, although I don't know how long they'd signed up for it.
Yeah, they were there for quite a while. So
just as a sponsor, you start to, you might be concerned. You're in Canada and you're trying to, you're trying to showcase.
Right.
Yeah. So then 69. So at that point now, Jimmy said, well, yeah, and you mentioned it earlier. Jimmy said, well, if I got to go to Perth next, I'm not doing, So
I'm out.
So was he already figuring, man, this is a pretty good team. My chances of going to Perth are too high. I don't want to continue.
Somewhere he must have. Yeah. He thought there was a real possibility that it could happen because he was out right from day one. I think before we left Montreal, he was out.
Were you feeling at any point a little bit that maybe you were getting too much success and you weren't letting anyone else in, or you were happy to keep winning Alberta at that point?
I don't think that ever happened.
That never came.
Ever.
Never. No. Oh, okay. So there's still a competitive fire, no matter how congenial as fellow you might have been. Quick, before we get to 69, the owl. So when did that get coined?
I think that was my friend Larry.
You think Larry?
That came up with that.
You blame him for that one, or do you?
I blame him for that one. It seemed like back in those days, a lot of guys had some moniker.
Fargo Joe, you mentioned
the potato farmer.
Okay.
And whatever. And although I don't know that Ernie ever had anything attached to him, but the King, I guess. Yeah,
which is interesting because Elvis was around too at the time.
Yeah, right.
It's interesting that he took that one.
So, so it was. Anyway, I guess it was. I had dark glasses back in those with big frames and back in those days. And I guess somehow or other.
Never had any trouble seeing the broom, or did you just kind of just go by feel anyway?
No, I never had any trouble.
Yeah. Okay. And then so 69, Jimmy's gone. You got to find someone. And then what was that process?
Well, it was a discussion, I guess, with Storey Sparks and myself. And I guess the first name that came to front was Dave Gerlach, and he just moved to Calgary, and for sure he
just moved from.
He moved in from. I think he moved originally from Stettler, but he moved to Calgary and joined the police force here. And I don't know whether I think he came from Stettler. I think he used to go with Gervais quite a bit when Gervais needed a third man. So and that's
he was a seasoned player.
Yeah, he played.
But was it still a surprise when he got a call from the Canadian champion? I
don't know. Probably not. We'd played against him, and always played well. So it was an immediate yes. Let's do it.
Just going back for a second to the previous, it had to be nice though that Jimmy got back, and for yourself as well, being like you mentioned, you guys were close. That had to be a really good feeling, and maybe even more so for him than you'd already done it before. But that must have been kind of nice.
I think it was. That was. I think that made 68 special for sure. Yeah.
To kind of get that feeling away so that that previous.
Not, I don't think it. Yeah, I think it was
enough that he was willing to say the next year, I'm good. I don't have a fear of flying. Definitely, yeah. So in '69, were the three of you thinking at some point, okay, can we get a guy for a few years, or or did even Dave come in going, look, guys, I get I'm okay to stick around for a bit, right?
Yeah, right.
Were people talking about that? The fact that
I don't, it was certainly different than any other teams that had some success, but it was just the way things turned out. It's not that everybody said, "Geez, you must be an awful guy to play for. You guys keep leaving."
I think it's more the case. I mean, other teams were doing it too. It's just that they weren't on the national stage because they weren't winning all the time. Lots of teams probably changed all the time, but they weren't having the same success. So you fit right in. That was in
Oshawa.
In Oshawa. Oh, yeah. Just everything clicking again, and that was or was there some potential close calls in that one?
Well, there was a potential close call before we got started. Yeah, I think it was the night before, and we're all having a beer in the hospitality room, and Ray Kingsmith sitting on a bed next to Dave Gerlach, and Ray had a cigarette in his hands and turned to say something, and Gerlach turned at the same time, and he stuck it right in his eye.
Yeah, just talking and moving the hands around, and
bang, and now he can't see. So, there was quite a bit of panic through Ray's connections, phoned somebody and said, we got to have an eye specialist. We'll do whatever.
Yeah. But you're in Oshawa now. Like you're there.
We're there. Yeah, we're ready. You're ready to go.
Play.
We're ready to play. And, and of course now the question
this is the night before?
I think it was the night before. It wasn't the night before. It was
close. Yeah.
It was 2 nights before. It was right before we started playing. And so now, and in those days you didn't have 5 people. You didn't have a 5-man team. It was just 4. But now you got to have, the rules were such that you had to have somebody that hadn't entered the playdowns, but still played out of your home club.
Which when you got 60 teams in the playdowns, where are you going to find a curler that's qualified to be on your? Which is strange, right? You think about it. You're representing Alberta. You should be able to get anybody from Alberta you want.
Yeah,
really.
I think you can nowadays.
But
you couldn't then. And
go back to the club and find somebody.
We had somebody. Yeah. We had somebody. Jimmy Shields. He hadn't thrown a rock in competition, so we said, "Geez, we'll get Jimmy." Yeah. And of course, now we would have the problem of getting him to Oshawa. He's not going to fly. He might have had it turned out, but it turned out the thing had just touched Dave's eye, and it was only a temporary. By the
Ray must have felt terrible.
First,
I assume too. Just
Oh yeah, I mean that's really bad.
Weird, just a strange. He almost. And there he is. He's there, kind of helping as a representative for Alberta. He might.
He's there. He's with us. I mean, he's part of our group for sure. Yeah.
But you overcame that, and was that a close Brier then, or was it one where you?
It was a close. Yeah, it was. We had some close games, and I think we went to Last Rock with Kevin Smale from BC.
Okay, I think I remember that.
And I think he was undefeated at the time too, maybe. So I think it was a game where it was the Brier. Anyway, we won, so I'm not positive of that. But
then there was some. Well, no, I think he had 2 other good, tough games. He had to play Ken Buchan out of Ontario, and then you played Pickering in the last game, right?
That could be right. And we were very fortunate talking about wins against Ken Buchan from Ontario. We, if I recall correctly, we scored 4 in 11. I think maybe to tie the game. Something. I mean, it was critical.
Was it kind of you're looking ahead to Pickering and you just had that big win, or was they played well and
they played well. Yeah, he had a team. I think Bobby Mann. I'm not sure who was on that team. Mike Riley, but they had a good team, and they just things went one of those games where we just struggled, And then in the 11th end, we got sort of a corner guard and piled a whole bunch of rocks behind it, and he kept trying to, instead of like nowadays, the first thing you do is peel that.
Well, you run it back and blast it
out of there. But nowadays on the ice of God, you either run it back. Anyway, you get rid of it.
You guys didn't use run backs as a strategy.
Run backs in those days were not possible. The kind of ice we played on, you couldn't do that.
You only do it if you had to, last resort thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, and they had to be close. Not like now. I mean,
So then I think against Pickering you had to make, was it a last shot game as well? That was close.
Probably. We always had a close game with Pickering.
Yeah
always.
Probably kind of the best ever not to win.
In my opinion, he would be the best ever. Yeah. If he'd have played on the ice like they play on today, he would have probably won every time he went.
Really?
He was a great...
Because nobody lifts the rock today. So
He was... well, it doesn't matter.
Maybe he wouldn't have the same
yeah, but he was a great, keen, fast ice player.
Was he? Really?
Really good, yeah. Really. He had control. Amazing. As high as he took that rock
because
back.
you'd think, given that slide, it would be more attuned in hitting, but really what you're saying is he had a touch.
He had a real touch. He had a real touch, and he was smooth as silk.
Well, it's like Hector, too, right? Like Hector really had touch. He wasn't really a great hitter.
That's right.
And how about you? Were you just sort of a guy that had all the shots? Did you feel you had a strength in one area, or just...
Well, my biggest strength was my out turn. And
no one ever figured out not to give you out turns?
I think initially, but that came from when I started in high school. My buddy's dad said, look, you guys are going to learn to play out turns because nobody can throw an out.
Oh, really?
So we play
okay, really?
We played and threw nothing but out turns. So it became my go-to shot. But
I'm saying, did any of your competition ever figure that out? And try to play you away from it?
I don't think so.
Or your in-turn was...
Yeah, the in-turn was okay. For the most part, it was...
Yeah, because a lot of time in those days, guys would try to play away from a guy's strength, right?
Yeah,
potentially
that's right.
play an end to get away from a certain shot.
If there is such a thing, I don't think there is nowadays.
These days, not
play now.
Not as common, no.
No.
And then again, another world championship, and three-time Brier champ. So now you go into 1970. You still feeling like you want another one of these? You're not. Like, you haven't lost any desire at all.
I still want that one in 70 too.
Well, this is interesting because Ernie talks a bit about. Actually, talked a lot about the Brier he lost, the kind of the next year, right? Yeah. So the desire never leaves, right? It just and life and other things weren't pulling at you. Although you did mention it, eventually, kind of career started.
Eventually, but at this stage, I really had good cooperation.
And you had Dave on the team in 1970 again.
We did.
Okay.
Same team exactly.
So that's a bit of a change.
It was a bummer.
Yeah.
We lost last rock to Gervais in Edmonton. But amazingly, in 1969.
Last rock. So who's your last or his last? Like who made the last shot? Then?
Hector, I think, had last rock. Yeah. But there was some things in there that turned out not good compared to the year before.
Oh, what do you mean? Just conditions, or were there things?
Not in terms of performance.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And it was one of those things. The year we won the Brier and went undefeated in Oshawa, Dave Gerlach never missed a critical shot. But he was still wanted to play, still liked to play, but he forgot about practicing or being committed, and then he struggled.
So there was a bit of a letdown the following year.
It was a letdown for him. Yeah, it was a letdown there. And I'm not sure that was the whole reason, but anyway, so that was that.
Yeah, but still that close. Now, I'm sure Hector doesn't have a whole lot of sympathy.
No, he has not.
At that point.
No.
Because you'd pretty much own the 60s at that point.
And, we got to him a couple times in the 60s. Yeah. One year in the corral when Warren Hansen was playing with him. And that was another, so we had a comeback there in one game.
Did you get along with Hector then? Did you guys have like an off-ice kind of camaraderie? Well, maybe camaraderie strong, but just respect.
Actually, we went to Bonspiel together.
Did you? Yeah.
We went to Spiel in, I think it was Revelstoke. It was a big cash spiel, and there was only three of us, again, Storey, Sparks, and myself. So we got Gervais to come and skip. And both Storey and Sparks said, that's it. We are not ever playing for Gervais again. They swept every rock.
So when we talk about soft touch, it was very soft, is what you're saying. Yeah? Really?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Well, we had a great time, and I think we lost the final. I'm not sure, but we had a great time. And,
but he was a character for sure as well.
Oh yeah. It was. Well, we had a lot of interesting games in the 60s for sure,
and big battles.
And 1970, he stole that one.
Who else was around that kind of never got out of Alberta at that time? Then that you can think of that had some runs or
funny. The first year that we went to the Brier, we played Rick Cust in the final. Rick Cust ended up playing for Baldwin in a couple of Briers. Was a good curler played out of the Air Force Base, Cold Lake. And I think in the final game there to go to the Brier, I think Jimmy had to make his last rock. I'll never forget, he wanted to play a hit on a rock in the 8-foot. And I said, Jimmy, all you got to do is draw the full 8-foot. We're going to the Brier. Yeah. It's just a simple draw. Yeah. And I talked him into it. He threw it right in the button.
But he was nervous about it.
He wanted to play a hit, yeah.
He was, really?
Yeah. I don't know why.
And like you say, as hard as hits were as well.
Anyway.
So is that the way you coach? Is that exactly how you told it to him? You just kind of just shook him up a little?
I said, Jimmy, you can't get it. This is what you asked for. You dream for this kind of a shot to go. And they probably had another rock in the house is why I was adamant.
Yeah, because you throw that hit, and if you just roll a bit one way or the other,
maybe you don't win.
And then so you had a few more. So how'd the 70s go then? That's when you started.
70s went the opposite of the 60s.
Yeah.
We lost in 70, and I was going to try and look back so I could tell you. But I know for sure we lost in 74, and we lost one other time in
the year Hector went in 74.
Hector went in 74, yeah. We lost to him in 74. Mm-hmm. And the last time that I seriously played was 78. We lost last rock to Tommy Reed. And Larry Wood said, the worst thing that ever happened to you, because he said the ice in Montreal was exactly the kind of ice you'd have had no trouble.
What's that?
Doing the whole thing. Just the ice was fast and swingy. It curled and a bunch, and sweeping was everything.
So how old you'd have been at that point then against Tommy?
Yeah, we were getting.
Was that still with Bernie at that point and Fred?
No,
at that point,
completely new team.
Yeah, even Fred.
Completely new. Yeah. Guy by the name of Jack McFarland, Don Nelson, who'd won a couple of Canadian firefighters championships. Used to play with George Fink and Terry McFarland. And,
so is it a close one against Tommy, and one that you look back and think could have?
That was brutal. I mean, that was really a heartbreaker. And he got really lucky. I think it was very first end. It looked like I'm going to have to try to find a draw, some way to get a rock into the house to count 4. And he throws a rock, attempting to do something, and he hit a rock about 4 feet over the hog line and ended up right on the button. And I had no chance to get there. Yeah. No chance. And it went to last rock, and he had last rock. And I thought he'd racked on a guard. I still can see it today. And his sweeper just pounded it out of his hand all the way, and somehow it got by. I remember Jack saying he's racked, and it went by. And he went to the Brier, and we went home. That was critical.
So was it not for trying after 70?
78. It was 79 where I got the chance to start my own business, and which was going to entail quite a bit of traveling, and I wasn't going to be able to commit. So as much as I still would like to have played, and then I guess the team we had then, I don't know, I think that we probably would have stayed together.
But up until that time, is it fair to say then that when you approached a season, curling was first, and then the career was sort of, and work was second, and you, like you say, you take up your vacation time, and
wasn't 78. Yeah, I was still using all my vacation time basically. Well, I'd been with the same company now for quite a while,
and still
they'd let me take my family and my 2 kids for a week in the summer.
So then after that, you still kind of stay in the game a little bit. Did you play as go to a spiel here or there, just to
I tried a couple of those, and it didn't work out very well. And so I didn't, but I did play a little. My son was in university now, and we did go into playdowns a couple of times.
Oh, yeah.
And we had a fair showing, and I wish I'd had more time in retrospect to spend on it, and we could have tried to do a little more, because I still was young enough that I was still playing
in good shape.
I was still in my very early, my 40s, early 40s. Yeah. But certainly, I was in good shape, so playing wouldn't have been a problem. It was just the travel. And Greg was in junior curling, and he lost to Southern Alberta 3 or 4 times. Ended up winning a Canadian mix with Kevin Cooey.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So he was a player. He was a good player. I always thought he was a better player than I was, but he just never got. You got to have 4 guys. One guy doesn't. And
you all have to have the same commitment. And nowadays, the commitment level is so much higher.
Is unbelievable nowadays.
Let me ask you a couple other sort of questions. Being in Calgary, so Paul Galzel was coming up just as you were on your tail end. Yeah. What was your first impression of Paul? Do you remember your first seeing him?
Well,
coming up. He
was there all of a sudden. Yeah. He was there, and he was everywhere. And,
they were young, right? They were so young.
And,
And you were crew cut, very short. Always kind of had. Did you ever change your hairstyle?
Never. No, we were always the same. We were a pretty boring group.
Yeah.
Story always had a rush cut. Sparks too, eh? Sparks had a rush cut. Yeah, we were all clean cut.
So do you remember your first game against them?
No,
Did you play those guys at some point? You must have played them.
Yeah, we did play them a few times, and we were never better than 50-50, I'm pretty sure.
Really? Yeah.
He was playing good.
And you guys were kind of older seasoned at this time. It must have been interesting to come up these young guys.
I'm not sure what year did he win this?
Well, 76
World?
Was 76. Yeah.
Yeah, so see, we were sort of, our good team was sort of the team that we had consistently with Sparks. It was Sparks, I always blame Sparks for leaving. I said we might have won 2 or 3 more. Alberta hasn't got to the Brier, but
if you have a successful skip playing second for you, usually in those days, you're going to do pretty well. Yeah.
And he was a great sweeper too. Like him and Storey could sweep all the way down the sheet, and I holler at the hog line, and they would just double time it in. They were unbelievable. They made a lot of shots. A lot of shots.
Like they kind of, I've heard a lot of those famous stories about Frenenza would say, "I'll bet you $20 you can throw the rock and it won't go in the rings."
That's right. Yeah, they wouldn't. I wouldn't bet against them on that. No.
Yeah.
Not the way Storey ended up being able to judge rocks. They'd win most of those, but they were great. And then
Lukowicz was coming. That was just kind of at that time too, right? So Ed came. Well, he won in on that team in. He got out in the 70s at one point, right?
I think the first year he got out, I think we lost to him in the South final. Yeah. At the North Hill, or at the North Hill Club, I think. Yeah.
Kind of, you were just sort of at that, just at that kind of transition. But I mean, Alberta, and I think a long, strong curling history, right? I think and I sometimes, especially being someone who came from Manitoba,
right.
You're when you grow up curling in Manitoba, that's all you're supposed to believe, right? Is it's
that's
the great,
that's
greatest
curling started.
That's what they like to think, right? But I mean, really, the strength of the teams and all the success. I mean, I think that's what's even more telling. You at a time when guys weren't going to I don't care what province it was, guys weren't going to the Brier every year, right?
No.
It just didn't happen. Do you ever look back and think, how the hell did we do that?
Yeah.
Even just getting there,
there was, for sure. You look back and you can think of, like the situations I say where, it could have easily gone the other way. Eh?
Yeah. I think to me, that's probably what's even more impressive than anything. Is just to get there that many times through that era. And sometimes, having to bring in a different player and do it. I mean, it just wasn't done.
Well, right? we were fortunate in the guys, both Jimmy coming in and Dave coming in. Yeah. They fit right in, and they were good players.
Well, I know one other question like that. So, gamesmanship. Did you ever? Were there any good stories? You don't have to name names, but things where guys would try little tactics or techniques to either get under your skin or things.
Well, I remember one, and I didn't think about it at the time, but I know it was aimed directly at us. Our team. It was a 1963 Brier, and we get on the elevator to go up to our hotel room. And Sam Richardson's on there with, I don't know whether Ernie is with him or one of the other players. Arnie, what? But anyway, he said, look, all we got to do to win the Briers, beat these guys. We beat these guys, we win.
But he pointed at you.
Yeah.
And at this time, this is your first Brier.
I sort of, and I didn't know Sam at the time at all, eh? And I thought, we'll see, I guess, in my own mind. But anyway, turned out they did beat us, and they did win the Brier. So... other than that, there was shots back and forth, but off the top, that one I never forget, and that was a long time ago.
And anything else we miss? You can think?
No, I'll show you a couple of pictures over here on the wall before you leave. But anyway,
and you never
it was
never tried to tackle the seniors or have a little run at it. No,
I was
too busy.
I was decided to go to work. And fortunately I did.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to go spend my winters in the sun, as I do. So
Yeah. But do you follow it though? Do you watch? Try to watch it down there.
I have satellite. So I watch it all. The only thing I'm really unhappy with in the curling world today is Grand Slam and 8 ends. I think eight ends. I think 8 ends took a lot away from the game. That's too short.
14? Should we go back to 4? No, that's
no. I think
you never
I think they got it right at 10. I think 10 was good. 12 was a long game. And it was a long game when you were playing against slow players. But if you're playing against a guy like Richardson, it was fine. You're still playing 2.5 hours. But if I remember a guy from the name, his name was Tracy out of Quebec. We'd all be back in the hotel room having a cold beer. They'd still be broadcasting. Tracy'd still be on the ice playing whoever he's playing. Okay. 3 hours, 3.5. I didn't have any rules on time. It was brutal.
So he rivaled the DeBlonds out of Manitoba because that was always the nefarious DeBlond brothers.
Yeah, they were slow.
Okay, so you know the story.
They were slow.
Too.
So, and we hated slow play, and we always thought we were quick, but we had trouble beating Ernie and his team up when we're on the same draw. I mean, if we're on the same draw, I'll be damned.
The other way to play quick is to get up a lot too.
Well, yeah, that's right. Maybe that's why he was the quicker. He was winning easier than we were. Yeah. I'm not sure, but
that might have been. Well, great. Well, this was fun.
Yeah,
I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I did too. I wish my memory was a little more
I think
clear on some occasions. But anyway,
thanks a lot.
Thank you, Kyle.
Yeah. they're running a Grandmasters, right?
Yeah,
so it's 70 and over.
Right.
65 for women, and it's mixed teams, right?
Okay.
And they actually get, this year now, they've surpassed the playdowns for men's in Ontario. So there's more playdowns for the Ontario Grandmasters. There's more teams that are playing down to go to the Brier. That's a little
that's weird.
sad too, right? Yeah.
That's weird.
That's amazing. Yeah.
I think one of the things, unfortunately, just the way curling has turned here, you've got that elite group now that sort of control the whole thing. And if you're to get into that, to break into that, is really tough, particularly the men's side. I noticed that ladies are having, like this past weekend, this Casey Shindig.
Well, yeah, they've had different...
Lethbridge, she stepped up and ran
and first Grand Slam, like they had to qualify in, and which I think they need more qualification event. They need more of that to let these teams in.
To let some other teams in so that they have...
It's the biggest thing, I think, is the conditions, right? Like these are unique conditions with these ice conditions and these rocks.
That's right.
And most of the teams don't get enough time in that environment. So what happens is, even if they manage to maybe sneak into an event, what's their chance of staying?
That's right. Very slim. Yeah, because you haven't had any, haven't had any exposure.
Part of it is, it's, the way some people look at it now, it's an Olympic sport. The rest of the world's getting good.
That's right, yeah.
You know what? It should be hard.
Yeah.
It's kind of the idea.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But it's certainly taken a diversion away from some of the historical way that the game kind of came up from a grassroots model.
When you look at the number of participants that are entering at the initial level to get into the playoffs, like even for Alberta, I'm not sure how much, there's already, before any playdown started, there's already maybe 4 teams are already qualified right in the provincial final.
And that's part of it. Like what used to happen too. So I've talked with some of my old friends, and actually Steve Lobel is an example. We talked about it. Like when we came up, you played playdowns. You just did it.
That's right.
It was like an obligation of part of the game. And you knew, by the way, hey, you might play a world champion in your club playdowns, or if you get to the zone, you're going to play somebody. You're going to have a chance to battle, Eddie Wernick or whatever. And nowadays that appeal's gone, right? Like you're not even going to see Kevin Cooey until you got to make it to the semifinals. And I think most teams look at it and go, I'm not,
That's right. You got no chance.
Well, you got no chance to play. So even the appeal of, hey, I'm not going to win, but what an opportunity to at least play these teams.
That was a big part of what went on when we were curling.
Yeah.
There's a lot of guys that really didn't assume that they were going to go to the Win Alberta, for instance, but would play just to see if they could beat us. And I know one of the first years that I had any success, I played against Hugh Brown, who had gone to the Brier, but he had Hugh Brown, Barry Coleman, Bernie Sparks. Somebody had an all-star team. In fact, they won the Rainbow, and they beat Richardsons in the Rainbow.
For that $1,000,
Yeah, for the $1,000. Then we come to the city playdowns here, and I got a team just made out of the club, and I like to junk it up.
So you were the
with those
killer
guys, and
that year.
I really spoiled a really good team. Chances of winning, because we weren't going to win, but
did you ever tease
we did.
Bernie about that after? Probably not.
No, I don't think I ever did. No.